Good morning, it's good to see everyone. We'll get seated and get started. Again, I heard one morning, good morning. I heard Hawk back there, morning. There you go. That's it. All right. This morning we're going to be dealing with the Ammonites and the Syrians, or actually they go by another name. I'll show you when we get in there. But we're going to be, actually Syrians is what it says in the Bible. And that's where they are today, of course, still today. But we're going to go ahead and get into our questions first, as the Ammonites, Syrians will be defeated by David. We know that he's dealt with a lot of battles, a lot of wars, and it seemed like peace was coming, but a couple countries want to try it. And they're going to make the biggest mistake of their life, as we see as they go through it. So let's go and jump to the question to go back to Jesus in Mark 15, Matthew 27. And the question, first one is, did Pilate find reason for charging Jesus? No, didn't find any reason whatsoever. In fact, he wanted to do what with him? He wanted to let him go. And it was hoping that that would be the case, because once a year, at the Passover, every Passover they do that, and they didn't want him, they wanted a murderer instead to be released. Showed just how evil in the hearts and how hard their hearts were. Next one, after Jesus had been flogged, how did the soldiers dress him? What did they dress him? Two things. A crown and a purple robe, exactly, and a crown of thorns. Remember that? And it says they smashed it down on his head. So you just imagine. Back then, those thorns they're talking about, they're about like that. So if anybody's dealt with thorns, we all know what that's like. As they made fun of Jesus, what did the soldiers do to him? They hit him, they spit on him, and they, degrading him, oh, King of Jews, and it was just really bad deal all around, just terrible. All right, one of the next one, all the way back to Moses now, Exodus 18 with Jethro. How did Jethro advise Moses to divide the responsibility of judging?
One thing you have a certain amount of people, like doing certain tasks.
Exactly. He would split it up in men. He said you would judge by thousands, hundreds, and exactly right. Just, and would do that. And so, because remember, Moses was doing how much of it? All of it. He was sitting before them all day long, judging them. And, his father-in-law that he took advice from, gave him great advice, said, you can't do this anymore. You're not going to what? You're not going to live. You're not going to make it. It's just going to destroy you. And so he did that, and so you see such a difference in there. So we go to the next one. David, 2 Samuel 6. After Uzzah's death, did David take the ark of God to the city of David as he had planned? No. It was left 3 months in a home. And we see there in that home that it says 3 months later, why did David decide to have the ark brought to his city? Why did he decide that?
Because he blessed. I can't say his name.
Exactly. It was blessing the house. We see there basically blessing. Everything was being done where it was at. And David was told that, and he was like, oh, it's time to bring the ark home. The question is, though, is how did he do it this time? Because the first time he tried it was with a cart, and that's what Uzzah touched. And of course, when it started to fall, more like probably a reflex, and he died. So how did he bring it this time?
He used it with the staves.
Exactly. He put the staves or the poles through the sides that was made to be done that were there, and that my computer just went off. There we go. And the Levites would of course be the ones that would carry it, and we don't know if he just. It sounds like more like David wasn't aware exactly what he was supposed to be doing at first with it, and figured that out, found that out, and made it right after that. Next one, yes or no? Did God promise that one of David's offspring would be king after his death? Yes, he said, he knew it would be a man of his seed, of course, would be over there. So how did God say, who did God say would build a house in his, that is God's name? It would be exactly, said it would actually be the seed of David, and another man. We know, of course, that man would be Solomon later, his son, as we see that would be the case. David would collect everything, and Solomon would build it. Next one, David 2 Samuel 8. What war implements of Hadadezer king of Zobah, did David take to Jerusalem? 2 Samuel 8:7. Golden shields, exactly right. One thing he took was the golden shields. Next one, though, after all the silver and gold they collected, what did David do with all the silver and gold which he took from the nations that he had conquered? Remember, a lot of that, he didn't have to go get it. They did what? Voluntarily. They brought it to him and were handing it over. What did he do with it all? Did he melt it down and make his house even better? No. Gave it all to God. Put it to the house of God, the tabernacle at that time, we would know. Remember, this would help later build the temple, of course, would help a lot of that we see there. Because it wasn't being used on the tabernacle, we need to understand, it was just being stored. And it would have been stored actually in the tabernacle. It wouldn't fit there, so they were storing it somewhere. But it was for God in his house. How did David treat the people of Israel while he was king? Very, very good. He says he had justice for everybody. And, he was a very just man and wanted to make sure everybody was treated the same. And we just see a lot of greatness in David with that point. 2 Samuel 9. Why did King David want to show someone of Saul's house special kindness? 2 Samuel 9:1. Because Jonathan, exactly right, all about Jonathan, remember? And he said he wanted to show kindness really to Jonathan and his son, Mephibosheth, or Mr. M, who's still alive, as we know and understand. That's who he took care of. Name Jacob's 2 wives and their maids. What's his 2 wives' names? Rachel and Leah. I heard that. Leah was first, then Rachel, of course. And then what were the maids' names, the handmaids? Willa, and who else? Here you go. Zilpah. Zilpah and Bilhah. Very good. 50-50. A good chance. All right, got it right there. So, but exactly right. Let's see. All right, so that's the end of that. We're going to jump in now to the Ammonites and the Syrians are defeated in 2 Samuel chapter 10. And we know it's interesting as we look at this fight that's going on. The Syrians have been a problem to the world for years, and then they've dealt a lot of blows. And now we see changes there, of course, going on and so on. But a lot of these countries that are over there, that lasted till our time are still, we see all the fighting and we know what's going on right now with Iran and with us and with all the other, basically all the other countries over there. It's just a constant war, it seems like. And we pray that will be taken care of. And that's really what's happening today, really, is, David wants peace. And there's people that see David, that he doesn't just want peace, they think he has way too much control. But here's the important part. They say he has control, but was David going after he got all the kingdom? Was he trying to take stuff from the other regions, the other kingdoms throughout? No, he was leaving them alone. But they couldn't figure it out. They were trying to do more. So we get in this area here. Our message today, of course, titled Ammonites and Syrians Defeated. It'll basically, for a couple, so it comes to 2 Samuel, as we see here in chapter 10, but also a little bit of it, we'll reference it just for some numbers, basically. 1 Chronicles 19 is where you also see it take place. This chapter unfolds during the height of King David's victories, everything he was doing well, winning, as we know, after the Lord had subdued all of his enemies, what we're told in 2 Samuel 8:6. Yet even in time of triumph, David is facing insults, betrayal, and war, and once again, and so he's dealing with this after the peace had already started. So this chapter really, it teaches about 4 things, really. It teaches us about sympathy, how sympathy is rejected. And we'll look at that at the beginning. Dignity dishonored, loyalty basically tested, and the courage that's displayed, not only from David, but also from his men, but especially from David, because what David's going to do in chapter 10, you don't see a lot of kings doing at the age that he's at, what we're going to find here. And I said 4 or 5. The final part will be the sovereignty of God. All the sovereignty of God and how important it is. So as we look at this, we understand we need to begin looking at who these people were, because there's some names mentioned here that we've heard them before, but we want to mention who they are. And of course, the countries, the Ammonites and the Syrians. Israel is also mentioned here. Of course, I'm not going to be detailed about Israel because we know that. So let's begin with the first one. The first one that's going to be mentioned, we're going to read our text this morning, is Abishai. We know that Abishai was the son of Zeruiah, which is David's sister. We find that, of course, 1 Chronicles 2:16, making him David's nephew. He was we're told he was a very mighty warrior. You read about history about him too. One of David's chief commanders, really, you see having. So he would be involved in all the battles, all the wars, everything that was going on. But what's interesting is he stood faithfully not just by David, but his brother, a name we will recognize, and that is Joab. Joab is his brother, also be the nephew of David, and courageously fought against Israel's enemies constantly. He just did what needed to be done. Which brings us to Joab. We've heard his name before. Joab, Abishai's brother, as we just said, was the commander. He was the commander of David's army. So he's over everything. He's the commander of all of it. A brilliant, very brilliant, but very complex military leader, really kind of the way to look at it. I mean, and we know God, of course, God's going to take them and tells them things to do, and that's a great thing. And I believe, I'm sure a lot of their tactics they learned from God. God telling them, go do this, that, and I'm sure they figured that out over time. Joab led most of David's successful raids. I said raids, wars that they went up against fighting. He, like I said, he had tactical wisdom, but he also had a lot of spiritual insight as he entrusts the outcome battle to the Lord. And we're going to see that in chapter 10. You're going to see where his faith is and why he was so good at what he was doing. And, of course, with that of David. Then the Ammonites. You have the Ammonites. Now, the Ammonites were descendants of actually Lot. They were Lot, which is Abraham's nephew, we know. Genesis 19:38, it basically says, here, I'll just read this one, and I'll have other people start reading. And the younger, she also bore a son and called his name Benami. He is the father of the people of Ammon to this day. It goes back, he is the son of Lot, as we understand, became the father of the Ammonites. Therefore, the Ammonites were distant relatives of Israel, right? Everything goes back to Abraham. We see that, which would be actually Terah. We see Terah, and then it comes down there to Abraham, and Lot, we'll see a little ways down through that. But this is the area that they control. Just to give you an idea of the fighting and what's going to happen here. They control a huge swath of area. Most people wouldn't want to live in this area because it's very what? Very rugged, all desert, basically, all desert, mountain. Even here, if you notice as we see here, you see the green, and the green kind of disappears as you go farther over, and that's really what happens here. So they have a big area, but it's really an area that no one really desired to have, and so we find that. So they are also known as, we would say, the Ammonites. The next one, the Syrians, sorry about that. The Syrians, also known as Armenians. We know that name too, we've heard that one. The Syrians, as we see, is what you find usually used in the older translations. We would say King James, New King James, 1901. Other translations, if you read it, they might change it to Armenians because you understand that somewhat with the history. They were a Semitic people, inhabited the region of Aram, modern-day Syria that we see today. They were frequently at odds with Israel and often hired as mercenaries. So it shows these were fighting people. This is what their real... Because you didn't grow a lot where they were and everything. Their main thing was they would go out and they would fight people, they would raid, they would just kind of steal things. And that's kind of what they were used for. And so we know that they're going to be used in chapter 10. They're going to be used against Israel. And we see that. Israel, I'm not going to go into, of course, all the explanation there. We know the descendants of Jacob, his name being changed to Israel. And we see that happening. So with all that taking place, I want to just kind of get to the family tie here. Here's Terah. We see the dad. We have Abraham and Haran on each side. And then you see below that, of course, we know Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Esau, 12 tribes of Israel, Edom, all that come through him. And then we have Haran, we have Lot. Lot is where the Moabs and the Ammons, or Ammon, we see, which would be the Ammonites and the Moabites, come from. And they were constant problems for Israel, constant problems. And it's terrible because they're so close in relation when you really look at this and what we see. So it is important to see that the Ammonites and the Israelites were not just strangers to one another. Without a doubt, both trace their ancestry back to the righteous line preserved through Noah. We know that after the flood, Noah's son Shem, as we see, Shem became the ancestor of Abraham. That's where this would happen in Genesis chapter 11. And from Abraham, as we stated, who comes from there? Lot, the same thing. We saw who comes from there. And then this conflict is going to take place. And basically what it becomes is a family feud, in a sense. I mean, a family fight, as we see them fighting and just doing things that you wouldn't, want family to do. But, this is nothing new. In our whole world, don't we see families, this happen all the time, that fights happen throughout the world with families. And, it shouldn't be that someone say, well, they're so far removed from each other. Well, what happened here is you have one side following who? God. You have the other side following God's. Exactly right. So many different pagan ways and so on. And it makes a lot of sense thinking about where Lot lived, where he came from, and his daughters and everything that took place there. It's just a terrible tragedy. So with all this happening, when we think about family, we think about brothers and sisters, we think about everything that comes with it. Tragic when those who share spiritual heritage become enemies, this is what it says. Now notice enemies. I'm talking, you have disagreements and so on. We're all going to have that. But I'm talking about enemies where you're killing each other. And that's what God says here about that. It's not a good thing. So we'll go and read this for us, please.
Behold, how good and pleasant it is when brethren dwell in unity.
Thank you. So when brothers dwell in unity, and these brothers and sisters, of course, both, and he's saying anybody that's part of each other, that's related in this sense, that we see. And so it's very important to realize that and know that God, doesn't want this. He's always wanted unity. But since time exists, from the beginning of time, unity just wasn't there. It started with, we see Adam and Eve, Eve kind of like taking that unity away from God by not listening to him, Adam going right along with it. And we see it happening from there. Just things went from there at that point. So with all that saying, let's go and get into our story where we're at here in 2 Samuel 10. We're going to begin with the sympathy rejected. What I mean by that is David's going to show sympathy because of a father dying. We'll see an individual. We'll read it in just a moment here. And it's going to be rejected. It's going to be looked at as a trap. So the chapter begins with kindness after the death of the Ammonite king. So notice, it was the Ammonite king. This is the thing about David. Usually when other kings of other kingdoms died off, the other kingdoms say this may be an opportunity to do what? To take it over, exactly. David's doing just the opposite, totally opposite. He wants to send word to basically the son of Nabash, which was the king of Ammonites, saying how sorry he was and difficult. And some other people get a hold of the son of the king, his ear, and things change. So let's go and read this here. 2 Samuel 10, beginning in verse 1, please.
It happened after this that the king of the people of Ammon died, Hanun his son reigned in his place. And David said, I will show kindness to Hanun the son of Nahash, and his father showed kindness to me. So David sent by the hand of his servants to comfort him concerning his father. And David's servants came to the land of the people of Ammon.
Thank you. So here it makes it very clear, doesn't it, that David said, the reason, it's not the only reason, but I want to show him kindness because he did what? Show kindness to me. And here's these two kings that got along. They got along with each other, even though they had totally different beliefs in God than what was found there. I think it's a good understanding for us that just because somebody's not a follower of God or the Church of Christ, it doesn't mean we say, I can't have nothing to do with you at all. We want to have things to do with people. We just want to convert them, bring them. And we see that. And so here with David, we see, David's heart. We see so many times the tender heart of David. And this is what we see in this moment. At the height of his military success, he wasn't arrogant as most kings are. When kings were winning and they were beating people left and right like it was nothing, they usually continued to conquer. They went as far as they could until they started losing, then they would retreat back. David's not like that. He's compassionate. And we see this here. This reflects God's character through David. God told David, this is the land of the Canaan you're going to have. No reason to take any more, and this is all you'll get. And David did exactly what God said. He kept it at that. So as we look at this, we see the kind of the reflection we would see of God's character here is kind of the reflection we see with us too, or it is. Ephesians 4:32, be kind, very simple, be kind to one another. And that's what we see here, we find with this. So as we look at this, all this takes place, but Hanun, the son of Nabash, basically listens to his suspicious princesses. Those princes that talk with him, that tell him, hey, this is, I don't think this is a good idea. And what they do, instead of saying, let's find out if they're truly here for this, they accuse David of espionage. They accuse David of sending spies into the land to investigate things and basically to see if they're able to take the Ammonites. Here's my thought to that. I don't even know why they would think that, because the way David was, David didn't have to send spies in. If he wanted to go somewhere and fight them, he would win. That's just what happened. And we see it as long as he was listening to God. So let's look at 2 Samuel 10:3. This is exactly what it tells us here. If someone go and read this for us, please.
And the princes of the people of Ammon said to Hanun, their lord, do you think that David really honors your father because he has sent comforters to you? Has David not rather sent his servants to you to search the city, to spy it out, and to overthrow it?
Thank you. Probably the worst time to try to give somebody advice like that, where they have to make a major decision, is when they're mourning. When they're dealing with a lot, when things are happening. He's mourning his father, And then, you know, I'm sure he's angry too at this point that his father died. He's, you know, even though he knows he's gonna take over, but still, it's tough. So what they do, they basically attack him at his weakest moment. It's kind of like we would see with the devil, you know, with Jesus, when Jesus has been fasting, you know, as we see for those 40 days and 40 nights. So we find this here. So what we learn is that fear, they're putting fear into his head. Fear twists perception. And that's what happens. That's why I've said today, we got to do everything we can in our life to not be fearful of things. We need to take fear, kick it in the teeth, and push it out the door. I mean, that's the way I look at it. Just have nothing to do with it at all. And because it does twist perception. It tells us and scares us of things that more likely are never going to happen. And this is what happens here. So Proverbs 29:25 kind of reminds us that. It says, the fear of man brings a snare or a trap is the way to think about that. And you think about it that way. Fear brings a trap. Yes, because it makes us very vulnerable to a lot of things. And it just takes place from there. So how often, you know, you got to think about this, and this is so important. Have we ever, or how often do we, hopefully we don't do it often, we don't do it at all, do we reject genuine kindness because of maybe insecurity or pride or fear? You know, sometimes, you know, I remember when we moved to Virginia the very first time, we came from Texas, and in Texas it was very common, very normal, and you know, it is here too, you see here in Georgia, but you know, if you're walking into a door and there's someone behind you, what do you usually do? Hold the door for them. You hold the door open. Now you get up in the Northeast, you know, closer to DC and the Northeast there, people think it's kind of weird. You know, I remember the very first time I held the door for somebody, and this is what they did when they walked by me. I'm right here like this, holding the door open, and they walked by doing this. Watching me the whole way by, like as if I was going to do something to them. I was like, that was crazy. And I told Melissa, I said, did you see that? And she goes, whoa, different. And you know, not that everybody's like that, but you see that. But this is what really happens. And people, you know, genuine kindness, and they're kind of caught off guard, like, I don't know if that's really kind or not. And this is what's happening with David here. So with this happening, the prince is going to take these men that were not spies. They were here to come out and basically tell the people, you bring compassion and say, David wants us to tell you how sorry he is, and so on. The king, we see the son and other men, they take them, and they're going to do something terrible to them that was a very, very huge insult back in those days. And it's this right here. The insult was a man's, the beard. The man's beard, of course, was always seen as dignity. And what they're going to do is they're going to shave, not the whole beard, they're going to shave half of it off. And also cut their clothing at their waist and drop them down, and they would have to be like that. And they were going to send them all the way back to Israel in that form. So let's go and read what it says, 2 Samuel 2, 10, 4 through 5, please.
Therefore Hanan took David's servants, shaved off half their beards, cut off their garments in the middle at their buttocks, and sent them away. When they told David, he sent to meet them, because the men were greatly ashamed. And the king said, wait at Jericho until your beards have grown, and then return.
Thank you. So as we see, Hanan humiliates David's men by shaving off half their beards and cutting their garments. We know in the Near East, ancient Near East, a beard was not a fashion statement as it is nowadays. It was basically a man's badge of dignity, maturity, and honor. And that's why they would grow those beards, why they would grow them so big. To shave a half a beard was a very, very calculated way to humiliate them. Because what he was expecting these men to go back to where? Go all the way back to Israel, to go back home. And while they're there, everyone's, you know, the way people are, you know, we were going to laugh, probably make fun of them, and just, you know, they may not, but they probably would. Either way, if they did it, just a humiliation to have it. So David's going to send them and have them wait, as we saw there at Jericho. Now, we know Jericho's been destroyed. They were told not to rebuild it on top of Jericho or God. You know, time would come, something would happen to them again. Well, they didn't listen to God, of course. Jericho at this point, it's not a full roaring town, we would say, and so on. That's why he told them to stay there, to wait there, because they were up in that area. And we see this. And this is important. First of all, let's look at a couple scriptures before we get into that, just to prove our point. Psalm 133, if someone go and read this, verse 2, talks about, of course, Aaron's beard and how important this beard was. If someone read it for us, please.
It is like the precious oil upon the head, running down on the beard of Aaron, running down on the edge of his garment.
Now we look at this, we go, okay, you mentioned it twice. You notice here, like the beard was a big thing. It was. It's a symbol of honor and a blessing is what we find. I don't know how many here have a hard time growing a beard. You know, I grow this area pretty quick. This area, it takes a while. And, you know, as we see that happening, and in fact, I started doing November, you know, I got tired, I said, yeah, shave it off. And, you know, we see that, but here's another thing we see here. When you shave it, here's an understanding of how it is a sign of disgrace and mourning. So we'll go and read this for us, please.
He hath gone up to the temple and Dibon, to the high places to weep. Moab will wail over Nebo and over whatever. On all their heads will be baldness and every beard cut off.
Thank you. So that's the only time you really cut your beard off, was a time of mourning, or if you were disgraced, you know, for something you'd done. It's usually where they would shave it off, and we see that. David responds, notice, David could have immediately responded with rage. We're not going to deal with this. I'm killing all those Ammonites. That's not what he did. And he didn't even, rage with his men. Why'd you let this happen? He responds with sensitivity. Notice, he tells the men, as we see, to remain in Jericho instead of going all the way back because he knows what it would do to them. And he says to stay there until your beard grows back. Now, I don't know how long that took. We don't know. I mean, because he's not going to say until the first one's completely grown. I guarantee you one of them took longer than all the others. And so they're waiting on that one. We see that because people grow beards at different rates. So here it is. This is Jericho, where we remember Jericho being at. And we see that Ramallah, as you see here, and you see Ammon, as we find here. So they go over to here to Jericho, and they're going to sit there and wait. So this is a lot of compassion, once again, of David. David doesn't only protect himself, he protects the dignity of his own men. And we see the importance with him. I mean, it was David that sent them there in the first place. And we find this. So with all this happening, what happens now is pride is going to escalate. It's going to escalate into war. These other Ammon's thinking, oh, we've got them on. We're going to go ahead and just take them all now. And David's like, actually, let me rephrase that. God's like, big mistake. And that's really what we see here, what takes place. So let's go and read this, verse 6, 2 Samuel 10. Someone read it, please.
When the people of Ammon saw that they had made themselves repulsive to David, the people of Ammon sent and hired the Syrians of Beth-Rohab and the Syrians of Zobah, 20,000 foot soldiers, and from the king of Makkah, 1,000 men, and from Ishtab, 12,000 men. Thank you.
Now, when you hear those numbers, we go, oh, maybe it sounds like a lot, or maybe it doesn't sound like a lot, considering how many, Israel had. Israel's special forces, just by itself during this time, we said was about 30,000 men. So their whole army, you count 100,000. I mean, it's just crazy how big it was during this time. So as we see this happening, what I want to do is, I want you to notice, remember what we said about the Syrians, their main work was usually being what? Hired as mercenaries. This is really what their job was, and we see this happening. So, but we look at this, but now I want to take you to 1 Chronicles. Remember what happens in the Bible. Sometimes it'll mention the same thing in a different area of the Bible. That's what we see happening here. Chronicles goes into more detail and gives us even bigger numbers of really what they were bringing against David and the Israel. So someone go and read this one for us, please.
And the people of Ammon saw that they had made themselves repulsive to David. Hanun and the people of Ammon sent 1,000 talents of silver to hire for themselves chariots and horsemen from Mesopotamia, from Syria and Makkah, and from Zobah.
Let me stop you there for just a second. Now, very important to understand, Mesopotamia, Syria, Makkah, and Zobah, they're all Syrians. This is what they are. Even though they're given different names, it's where they're living. But what we need to understand with this, notice, that's a big payment. I mean, we need to understand, 1,000 talents of silver, that's a lot of money. And so, see, they're not just saying we want to give you so we want them utterly destroyed. We want them gone. And that's what they were trying to do with this money. David, continue to read, please.
So they hired for themselves 32,000 chariots with the king of Makkah and his people who came and encamped before Medeba. Also the people of Ammon gathered together from their cities and came to battle.
Thank you. So you see even more chariots. We didn't read of that as we find understanding in that in 2 Samuel. So there's a lot of people. And then they got these other people from all these cities around them. So they're bringing them in. So what we understand here is, when the Ammonites realized they had become repulsive to David, that's what they believed. They believed that because they did this, David would probably more than likely do what?
Fight back.
Would attack. Well, even before they did anything, would attack them. And but you don't see that with David. Instead, what they do is they do this, and what they should have done is they should have just gone forward to David and repented of what they've done, make things right. And we see that, but they hired the Syrians instead, also known as we said the Armenians. Sin, when not confessed, compounds itself. Basically, is what we see. It just keeps compounding one thing after the other. Because usually if you sin or you tell a lie, like most people say, you tell a lie, you got to more than likely do what? Protect that lie. Tell another lie. Just keep on lying. We see that, and this we see it. James 1:15, I believe, gives us the understanding of this, of what sin actually does when it compounds. If someone go and read this for us, please.
And when it desires his concerns, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, brings forth death.
Thank you. So it's very clear, the compounding here is, when it's first conceived or thought of, to do, and we see that there happening, coming about, it gives birth to sin, and then sin, when it's full grown, says brings forth death, brings about death without a doubt. So it teaches us, when it's finished, it's bad outcome all around. Rather than seek for peace as they should have, they prepare for war. So this is what happens with that war. We find that Joab's courage of faith. Joab's like, David's going to tell him, hey, we've got the Ammonites coming this way, Joab, I need to send y'all out. We need to get this war taken care of. We need to finish this off. And David doesn't say kill them all. It's just, tell them you're making a big mistake. It's not smart. And they do this by sending not all of Israel, but a good majority. We see mostly special forces again, we would say. So let's go and read what it says, verses 7 through 11. If someone read that, please.
Now when David heard of it, he sent Joab and all the army of the mighty men.
We'll stop right there. So see, notice what it says, and all the army of the what kind of men?
Mighty.
The mighty men. So it's not all the army. The mighty men are the 30,000 that we're talking about. They're the ones that went around everywhere, we said, special forces in a sense. Chad, continue reading, please.
Then the people of Ammon came out and put themselves in battle array at the entrance of the gate. And the Syrians of Zobah, Beth, Rohab, Ishtab, and Makkah were by themselves in the field. When Joab saw that the battle line was against him before and behind, he chose some of Israel's best and put them in battle array against the Syrians.
And everybody.
And the rest of the people he put under the command of Abishai, his brother, and he might set them in battle array against the people of Ammon. Then he said, if the Syrians are too strong for me, then you shall help me. But if the people of Ammon are too strong for you, then I will come and help you.
Thank you. So it says the battlefield is divided. Syrians in the front, Ammonites in the back. So where is Israel?
In the middle.
They're stuck in the middle. It's where you usually what?
Don't
Don't want to be. Never want to be. You're in what we would call crossfire. It's not a good place to be. But notice Joab. This is what we talked about, his military skills and what he learned from God over the years. We see working, fighting for David and doing this. And it is this. He said, very smart. He goes, he tells his brother, if the Ammonites start to win over you, I will come over there and help you. But it's just the opposite here. You come, or opposite that. You come and help me. And so he makes it very clear, that's very smart, and we see that we'll take care of the strong one, and when we're done with the strong one, we'll do what? We'll go over and get the weak ones. Well, that doesn't even get that far. So what we learn is that Joab, as he wisely divides the army, takes the elite troops to face the Syrians, because they were considered like the worst, very, very strong and bad here, and assigns Abishai to confront the Ammonites. Then he gives one of the greatest statements of faith in the scripture, I believe. And it's one we hear Joshua say, and it's one that we hear Joab say. And I wonder about this time, does Joab remember the words of Joshua? Does he hear them and understand them? And this is where this comes out. Notice this verse 12, and you'll notice right there at the beginning, in front of it, if someone go and read that for us, please.
Be of good courage, and let us be strong for our people and for the city of our God. And may the Lord do what is good in his sight.
Thank you. This verse has so much in it. First of all, be of good courage, and let us be strong. Good courage and strength. We all hear those words, we recognize those, and he says, for our people, for the cities of our God. But notice what he says. He doesn't say, God, let us win the battle. Let us win right now. What does he leave it up to? God. He leaves it up to God. Notice, and the Lord will do what is good in his sight. So God's going to make that choice. They may not even have to fight them as we see this happening and so on. So that is, we see, this is basically very important to understand. This is, surrender without being submissive to God, courage without arrogance, action without presumption, which brings us verses 13 and 14. Let me see, I got 5 minutes. Someone go ahead and read this, please.
So Joab and the people were with him drew near for the battle against the Syrians, and they fled before him. When the people of Ammon saw that the Syrians were fleeing, they also fled before Abishai and entered the city. So Joab returned from the people of Ammon and went to Jerusalem.
Look at that. They didn't even have to do what? It sounds like they didn't have to fight. I mean, they may have killed off a few in the beginning, we don't know, but notice it says Joab and the people, it says, drew near the battle against the Syrians. They fled. And so there was something they saw. Either they thought this, Israel's in the middle and they're just going to do what? They're just going to give up, give up. But that's not what Israel does. That's what God's going to have happen. So we see this happening, very important. Job understood, I believe, exactly what we understand today about James. As we see in James 4, I'll read this, 13 and 16. Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go in such and such a city, spend a year there, buy, sell, and make profit, whereas you do not know what will happen tomorrow. For what is your life? It is even a vapor that appears for a little time. Notice that there. And then vanishes away. Then he goes on to say, verse 15, instead you ought to say, if the Lord wills, notice, if the Lord wills, we shall live and do this or that. But now you boast your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. See, this is exactly what Joab's doing. He's doing as God would want done, and he left it up to God to make the decision. So with all this happening, now we get to this, and I'll read from here, it's about out of time. David at the height of victory, as we see, is going to take place here. In fact, we know that this chapter, I'll get to that in a second, unfolds during the height of David's conquest. He's basically finding peace now. 2 Samuel 8, remember David defeated the Philistines, the Moabites, the Zobah, and Zobah's back in this fight. Did you notice that? And Edom, the scripture repeatedly says the Lord preserved David wherever he went. So it didn't matter where he go, God preserved him. Here again, God grants victory, and the Syrians flee. The Ammonites, they retreat. Everybody's retreating. They're leaving them alone. Here's what happens though. The Syrians, remember the Ammonites aren't as strong as the Syrians. The Syrians have been paid a lot of money. So they need to do what? They need to fight. And we see this. So the Syrians regroup, and then David basically comes to a decision. Instead of sending just Joab out, or Abishai, his brother, he says this, he goes, I'm tired of this. We're going to end this today. We're done with this. We're not going to deal with these people anymore. So David personally, as an older king, gets out there in the front and leads the army. I mean, this is just remarkable. Talk about basically the faith that it takes in God and everything with us, because I'm sure they would get around David, try to protect him if something happened. But David has always been what kind of man? Just, he's been very sensitive in it, but what was he like when it came to war?
He was a leader.
He was a leader, and he was a warrior. I mean, he could fight. And so we see it, so it's in his blood in a sense. So here's where this is at. I want you to notice anything interesting. This area always is Mayhem and Peniel. Remember that, dealing with the ladder and dealing with, where we see Jacob fighting, against the Lord. We see the wrestling, it says there. So very familiar area. This is where they're not 100%, but they're pretty positive that this is where Helam is, where all this took place and so on, which brings us verses 15 and 18. Let me go ahead and read that. And it says, when the Syrians saw that they had been defeated, notice, by Israel, they gathered together. Then Hadazar sent and brought out the Syrians, who were beyond the river, and they came to Helam. And the Shobach, the commander of Hadazar's army, went before them. When it was told David, he gathered all Israel, crossed over the Jordan, and came to Helam. Notice, he didn't just take time, I just did get this done. And the Syrians set themselves in battle array against David and fought with him. Let me go back one real quick here. Notice here, when it was told David, he gathered how much of Israel? He said, like I said, we're finishing this day. He brought all the army, all of them. And we say, well, of course he left some in Jerusalem without a doubt, but the majority of all of them, the fighters are there. And so notice what he continues to say. And the Syrians set themselves in battle array against David and fought with them. Then the Syrians fled before Israel. Nowhere in here does it say that Israel lost anybody. Very important to understand. And it says, and David killed 700 charioteers and 40,000 horsemen of Syrian. Doesn't mean David did that on his own. I mean the Israelite, all of them. 40,000 horsemen of the Syrians, and struck Sobach, the commander of the army, who died there. So David, at his military peak, established, victorious, respected. Yet even in victory, we must be cautious. David does this. What happens though after this victory, a lot of times, you can become complacent. After this is one of the most worst moments in David's life, the decision he makes, as we see to basically in chapter 11, his failure with Bathsheba. And so David was feeling comfortable, I guess, and did some things that we know without a doubt that he shouldn't have. Just a terrible moment. 1 Corinthians 10:12, before I close, reminds us, therefore let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. So important. And then I'll finish up with this, I'm out of time. God is sovereign. As we understand, when David defeats Hazar's forces, the serving kings make peace with Israel and basically serve them. They serve them from there on out. And it's just a great statement once again of showing how strong God is, how important it is to follow God, and to know when you're with God, you're on which team? The winning team. That's the word to hear. You're on the winning team. And without a doubt. And because we've never seen God do what in the Bible? Lose. Never seen it. Israel's lost several times, but because they did not take God with them when that happened, or they made their own choice decisions. So let's just think about it there. We're going to close there. Appreciate all the comments. Any comments or questions before we close? None at all? All right, we'll end there. Thank you. Appreciate your time.